Big Bang Theory franchise's new George and Mary prove they're better than Sheldon's parents. The Big Bang Theory franchise has stretched further than almost anyone could have imagined. What started in 2007 as a sitcom about nerds, comic books, and awkward romances became one of television's most successful comedy juggernauts. But its biggest legacy has turned out not to be Sheldon Cooper's eccentric brilliance or the quirky humor of his Pasadena gang. It's the spin-off Young Sheldon. That prequel series didn't just flesh out Sheldon's childhood, it redefined George and Mary Cooper, his parents, in ways that make them more compelling and sympathetic than the glimpses we ever saw on The Big Bang Theory. What's fascinating is that the version of George played by Lance Barber and Mary Zoe Perry in Young Sheldon arguably surpassed the portrayals of Sheldon's parents on the original show, where they were mostly background figures used for punchlines or family anecdotes. In building them out into full characters, the franchise gave George and Mary nuance, flaws, and warmth. In doing so, it demonstrated that this new interpretation of Sheldon's parents is, in many ways, better than the originals. The original George and Mary, defined by jokes and absence. On The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon's stories about his parents painted a contradictory and often bleak picture of his Texas childhood. George Cooper Sr. was remembered as a man who drank too much, watched football all day, and was lazy. Sheldon frequently joked about his father's beer habit, his loud belches, and the fact that he died when Sheldon was still a teenager. Viewers only saw George in flashbacks and never got to know him as a full person. He existed mainly as a caricature, a blue-collar dad who didn't understand his genius son and served as the butt of jokes about Southern stereotypes. Mary, meanwhile, appeared in person often, played memorably by Laurie Metcalf. She was a loving, protective mother, but also stubbornly religious, conservative, and constantly trying to reconcile her faith with Sheldon's atheism. Her interactions provided great comedy, but they also made her feel rigid. Her love was real, but her characterization leaned on cliches, the overbearing church-going mother clashing with her eccentric genius son. Neither parent was ever truly given the same depth as the Pasadena group. They were sketched around Sheldon's exaggerated stories rather than presented as complex human beings. Young Sheldon's rewrite, turning caricatures into characters. Enter Young Sheldon, which reintroduced audiences to George and Mary not through Sheldon's memories, but through their own lived experiences. From the beginning, the series reframed George not as a lazy slob, but as a hardworking, complicated man trying to support his unusual family. He's still flawed, he struggles with stress, health issues, and the temptations of infidelity, but he's undeniably a loving father who genuinely wants the best for his kids. Lance Barber's performance brings a quiet sadness to George, making him far more than a punchline. Mary, portrayed by Zoe Perry, who fittingly is Laurie Metcalf's real-life daughter, also became more dimensional. Instead of just being the stereotype of a religious mother, she's shown as a woman whose faith gives her strength but also creates real tension in her marriage and with her children. She's compassionate, stubborn, funny, and conflicted, often caught between defending Sheldon's quirks and worrying about how the family is perceived in their conservative Texas town. By putting George and Mary in the spotlight, Young Sheldon made them feel like real people, messy, flawed, and deeply relatable. In doing so, it surpassed their original portrayals and gave the franchise one of its most emotionally resonant storylines. Why George is better in Young Sheldon. George's portrayal is perhaps the clearest example of how Young Sheldon outshines The Big Bang Theory. On the original show, he was often spoken of as a failure, lazy, drunk, and uninvolved. But Young Sheldon flips that perspective, showing a man carrying immense responsibility. He works long hours as a high school football coach, worries about money, and faces marital strain. Yet he also takes time to try to understand Sheldon, even if he doesn't fully get him. For example, George's quiet patience when Sheldon struggles with social situations highlights a side of him that Sheldon as an adult likely took for granted. He's the one who sneaks Sheldon out of uncomfortable situations or distracts him when things get overwhelming. Those little acts of fatherhood don't fit Sheldon's dismissive description, but they make sense in the context of how memory and perspective distort reality. Perhaps the most important change is that Young Sheldon redeems George's reputation. By showing him as a man trying his best in impossible circumstances, the show demonstrates that Sheldon's dismissive recollections from adulthood don't tell the full story. Instead, George becomes a tragic figure, flawed but loving, with his sudden death looming as a heartbreaking inevitability. Why Mary is better in young Sheldon. Mary, too, is richer and more sympathetic in young Sheldon. While The Big Bang Theory's Mary was often played for laughs as an overbearing Christian mother, young Sheldon deepens that portrayal. She's not just a woman of faith, she's someone struggling to balance her beliefs with her family's needs. One of the most compelling aspects of her character is the tension between her devotion to church and her loyalty to her family. She often clashes with congregants who judge Sheldon's eccentricities, showing that her love for her son outweighs her need for acceptance in her community. That complexity makes her far more than a stock religious mom character. Additionally, Mary's dynamic with George is one of the show's emotional anchors. Their marriage is far from perfect. They fight, they disagree, they drift apart, but they also love one another deeply. Their struggles with communication, finances, and raising three very different kids feel authentic, elevating them beyond the stereotypes presented in the original series. Memory versus reality. Why The Big Bang Theory's parents felt different. The contrast between the two portrayals highlights one of the smartest creative choices in the franchise. The Big Bang Theory showed us Sheldon's parents as filtered through Sheldon himself. His genius and stubborn personality warped his memories, reducing his father to a lazy drunk and his mother to a rigid religious fanatic. Young Sheldon, however, allows us to see them as they really were, complex individuals whose flaws were only part of the story. This difference reveals something profound about memory and perspective. Adult Sheldon remembered the things that annoyed him or made him feel out of place. But the audience, through young Sheldon, gets the fuller truth. In that way, the two portrayals don't contradict each other so much as complement each other. They remind us that children often don't fully understand their parents until it's too late. Why the new versions are better. By giving George and Mary more depth, the franchise transformed them from comedic side characters into the emotional backbone of young Sheldon. Their struggles, financial, marital, and personal, mirror the challenges faced by countless families. Unlike the original depictions, which leaned heavily on stereotypes for humor, the newer portrayals resonate with authenticity and heart. They're better because they're real. George isn't just the dad who drank too much. He's the dad who loved his children and carried the weight of a family he wasn't always equipped to handle. Mary isn't just the overbearing Christian mom. She's the woman torn between her faith and her love, often choosing her family even when it isolates her from her community. These versions of Sheldon's parents don't just make for a better spin-off, they retroactively enrich The Big Bang Theory.